Next, from the House chamber in the state capitol, we hear a portion of the historic and emotional debate around the effort to legalize gay marriage in Illinois. Members knew the vote on this bill would be close. It was so close that Representative Naomi Jakobbson from Urbana left the bedside of her dying son to be on hand for this vote. The bill did pass, with one vote to spare. This debate runs about 1 hour.
I've done a lot of research on this and studied. In 1964, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Abolitionist Theodore Parker first wrote those words more than 150 years ago, but they still hold true today. And when we consider the history of our great nation, the movement towards equality before the law for all is the defining characteristic of our American experience. We heard about Representative Curry talking about the evolution, and it can seem inevitable. But when she talked about Loving versus Virginia, the Supreme Court case that banned interracial marriage, that was only decided in 1967, less than 50 years ago. Alabama did not formally remove from its state constitution the text of a ban on interracial marriage until 2000. It's also easy to forget that 93 years ago from today, more than 40 members of this body could not have served your communities as representatives, much less cast a vote for yourself simply because you are women. Now, we still have a ways to go, but this is not abstract stuff. When I co-chaired Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign in Illinois, I did so in part because I wanted to help break down another barrier to equality. I wanted to make sure that every little girl knew that she could grow up to be president if she wanted to. Now, despite the fact that Hillary lost the primary, this state and our nation shattered another glass ceiling that year, and we elected our first African-American president. Now, whatever your thoughts about President Obama's politics, we can all agree that his 2 elections to the highest office in the world have demonstrated to all that discrimination cannot, shall not, and will not endure. Notwithstanding these advances, the continued fight for equality remains absolutely vital to our state. On average nationally, women earn 30% less than men for the same work. African American unemployment is nearly twice the national rate. Now, everyone in this room, we do our part to help change these inequities. We may not agree on how to affect these changes, but I know that everyone here believes that whether you're black or white, female or male, Latino, Asian, Jewish, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, that you should at least all start at the same place as everybody else. It's in that spirit that I stand today in support of Senate Bill 10. Now, I voted to pass our state civil union bill to ensure that couples have the same legal rights. And I believe that the provisions of our civil union legislation would make everyone in Illinois equal before the law. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. I have talked extensively with constituents, Republicans and Democrats, conservatives, liberals, independents, and they predominantly support the right of all people to a civil marriage recognized by the state of Illinois. And I stress the word civil marriage because I don't believe that anyone who understands our system of government would support a law that requires any religious institution to recognize a same-sex marriage if it elects not to. Now, while the civil union legislation that we passed was truly a noble effort to bring about long overdue equality, activists and legal experts have made it clear to me that it has not fully equalized our gay neighbors and friends. 95% is not equal. 99.9% is not equal. If your partner is sick or injured in an emergency room and you are not their husband or wife, and you're not carrying a durable power of attorney in your pocket, you do not have the same rights as my wife and I if I was sick in the hospital. Now, how many of you here have a durable power of attorney in your pocket with you? I bet you none of you do. And I don't, because I don't need one. And no one should need to bring a copy of a contract to a hospital when their partner is sick because of a distinction that we choose to make here in the General Assembly. Now, if being gay requires anyone to jump through extra legal hoops for any reason, then we have legally sanctioned the existence of a class of people with fewer rights than everyone else. This is by definition unequal and unjust, and the price of inequity falls squarely on all of us. Now, during the struggle against apartheid, LGBT activists in South Africa were instrumental in securing freedom for all in the new nation. The African National Congress, the party of Nelson Mandela, endorsed same-sex marriage as a policy in 1993. And the democratic constitution of the new nation was the first in the world to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation. And South Africa then legalized same-sex marriage in 2006. I refuse to accept that a developing nation less than 20 years after its founding as a democracy can be a greater guarantor of the fundamental liberty of its citizens than the home state of Abraham Lincoln. South Africa chose to accept its people as they are, and now they're a thriving democratic state, responsive to the will of its citizens and protective of its minorities. And my final thought is a very basic one. I've been married to my wife for more than 20 years, and we have 2 wonderful sons, and we're truly blessed. And after much study, conversation, and reflection, I can't think of a single way that granting same-sex couples the right to marry diminishes my love for my wife, our marriage, or our family. In my experience, activists fighting for marriage equality generally highlight the enormous hypocrisy of a system in which the state recognizes civil marriages but discriminates with respect to who can be so recognized simply based on religious dogma. Those who are against marriage equality almost always base their arguments on fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of divine retribution, or fear of a bad outcome in the next election. Time and again, those fears have proven to be unfounded. When we pass Senate Bill 10 today, we will not be the first state to make marriage equality the law of the land. We won't even be the 10th. We will be the 15th. This is not the time to be timid. Passage of this bill will say to every gay child and teenager, you are not less than you could or should be. You are exactly who you should be, and you are loved for who you are. Passage of this bill will send a message to all women making 70 cents for every dollar their male co-worker earns, and to the children living in poverty, that equality before the law is not just a vague promise on a 220-year-old piece of parchment sitting in Washington. It's a sacred trust that men and women have worked, fought, and died for, and it's still worth fighting for. Above the entrance to my law office is inscribed a quote from Deuteronomy. Justice, justice shalt thou pursue. Throughout my professional life, I've always tried to live up to these words. When any of us is disadvantaged by a law, we're all harmed. Those waiting have waited long enough. Justice, justice shalt thou pursue.
Mr. Clerk, Rules Report.
Committee reports. Representative Barfield Curry, Chairperson Committee on Rules, reports following committee action taken on November 5th, 2013. Recommends to be adopted for the floor is floor bill number 6 to House Bill 209.
Chair recognizes Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I guess it's been nearly 2 years now. I voted in favor of civil unions. I voted in favor of civil unions because I believed at the time that as a matter of law, we should allow same-sex couples to make health care decisions together, end-of-death decisions, inherit property without having to hire a lawyer. And at that time, in the press, I raised concerns about whether or not we in Illinois should take it a step further to marriage. Subsequently, as the sponsor of the bill pointed out, the Supreme Court issued a landmark decision which denied same-sex couples here in Illinois, but not in 14 other states, nearly 1,000 federal rights. 1,000 federal rights under the law. I've listened to both sides. I've looked at all of the research that has been put before me, and I've read the Constitution, and I really believe it's fairly clear. This is a matter of fairness. It's a matter of equal rights. It's a matter of ensuring those same-sex couples are able to garner those 1,000 federal rights. For that reason, I'll be voting yes.
Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the bill. You know, I want to focus my remarks today on something that's kind of getting lost today, and that's about individual religious rights. You know, we suddenly are quoting the Constitution. Well, why are constitutional rights only granted to priests and pastors and rabbis? It's been said by both sides of the issue that that's who exemptions are granted to. Our Constitution is about all the people. Where are the religious rights for those of us and those of the people of Illinois who think that this is wrong? I think it's been asked several times over the last year. Where are those rights? So I want to put aside that this is not about racial rights. This is not about equality pay. This is not about interracial marriage. My wife's Hispanic. It's not an issue. I'm not talking about that. This is about individual religious rights. So for a few of you that are new here, two things happened. I stood here on the floor and predicted in my remarks during the civil unions debate that supporters of that bill were really voting for gay marriage. That it was just a stepping stone for same-sex marriage, either by the courts or through legislation. So here we are with legislation 2 years later. Also, the other thing that happened in his closing remarks, the sponsor of the bill, which is our good friend Representative Harris, the same sponsor of this bill, assured us that he was not seeking to redefine marriage. And I quote, to tell you what this bill does and doesn't do. This bill creates a separate chapter in the Civil Code entitled Civil Unions. This law would establish civil unions which would offer the same basic benefits and obligations and responsibilities of marriage under state law. End of quote. He also quoted that major benefits would include hospital visitations, health care decision-making, disposition of deceased loved ones, remains, and probate rights. End of quote. And finally, the representative quoted saying that civil unions would be dissolved in the same manner as divorce. So, again, regardless of which side of this issue you're on, I think you would agree that both of us made accurate comments. But I guess you have to ask yourself, if all those rights were granted, then why are we here today? So, it's been said that earlier in the year that the sponsor and the supporters of this bill wanted 6 things. We were always told that 5 of them were granted in civil unions, and that the 6th one, Social Security benefits, was a federal issue and needed to be addressed at the federal level. Well, this summer, the U.S. Supreme Court decision on DOMA fixed that. Other facts that are out there, what are other states doing? Yes, 14 states have enacted, either through legislation or through the courts, same-sex marriage. Well, that leaves 36 states that don't. 31 of these states have constitutional amendments passed by their voters banning same-sex marriages. 31 states. Supporters of Senate Bill 10 say this is all about fairness and about love. Well, we already established that civil unions granted fairness. And you know, we don't need a state statute to define love. We all love our parents, we love our siblings, we love our relation. We don't need marriage for that. Love is a feeling between two people. But most importantly, regardless of which side you're on, again, I want to focus on this individual and personal freedoms that are not in this bill. And I even find it ironic that included in the title of this bill is religious freedoms. There are no individual freedoms in this bill other than for pastors, priests, and rabbis. And if it's not religious freedom, then It's religious persecution. So let's start with who would sanctify these marriages. Sure, there's priests and pastors and rabbis. They're going to be exempt. But what about judges? I've had 3 judges in my district call up and say, David, there is not a facility in your district that's going to perform these ceremonies. They're going to call me. Where's my religious individual freedoms? They're not in here. And you talk about church facilities. It's very, very carefully worded. Church halls, cafeterias, gyms, classrooms, and parish centers, not exempt. So just imagine a same-sex couple went to the door of St. Ignatius Prep School, where the speaker went to school, and asked to use Tully Hall or the Grand Gallery for a wedding ceremony, same-sex wedding ceremony. Under the language of this bill, they will have to be obliged or risk being sued. What about social service providers? Places like Misericordia. What do you think Sister Rosemary Connolly is going to say when someone comes and says, I would like to have a wedding reception here? And don't say that can't happen. Look at what happened after the Civil Unions Bill passed. And within weeks, our government said Catholic charities cannot place foster children in you have to place a foster child in a same-sex couple or lose your funding. That wasn't the intent of that bill, but that's what happens in this town. That's not religious freedom. The sponsor of the bill, and we're still looking at the language, said that there's exemptions now for private clubs. Knights of Columbus halls are a direct extension of the Catholic Church. They were set up to protect the priests. And, as recently as the 1920s in Mexico, what happened? It was the Knights of Columbus that helped end that religious persecution down there. I would want to make sure that language was ironclad, that Knights of Columbus halls are exempt. It was also mentioned earlier today about county clerks being forced to issue marriage license against the tenets of their faith. And this is happening in other states. In New York, Governor Cuomo said, either issue these licenses or resign. There are county clerks in New York, upstate New York, that are resigning. And I guess the supporters of the bill say, okay, resign. We'll eventually get all county clerks that agree with us, and life will go on. Bed and breakfasts, photographies, cakes. They all have individual religious rights too. Regardless if they believe in it or not, they should have the right to say, I don't want to involve myself in a ceremony. I'm still going to serve them cake. I'm still going to take their picture otherwise, but I just don't want to do it for that ceremony. What about our teachers who will be forced to teach their students that it's okay to marry someone of the same sex? That it's normal in society to want to do this. All the while it goes against their faith. And I remember the debate in the Senate when the Senate sponsor rolled her eyes when this was being up, and I know the questions weren't asked properly, but don't kid yourself for 1 minute that our teachers won't be forced to teach that this is all right in our schools. Sure, it's not contained in this bill, but it will be a part of their curriculum. And what happens to our kids when they come home and say, Dad, my teacher says it's okay, but I go to church on Sunday and I say it's not. Putting this into our schools is not right. It goes against the individual religious freedoms of the families and those students. And one other example of this is earlier this spring, House Resolution 202 was introduced. Before this bill even passed, which requires students to take a vow of silence to being attentive to gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender name-calling, bullying, and harassment. Couldn't even wait for this bill to pass, and now we're trying to change our education. And I hope I bring light that this bill isn't protective of all religious freedoms and all individual rights. You know, I represent a very conservative part of the state, a very Christian part of the state. And Leader Curry brought up a story. Well, I have a story too. It's about Nicholas and Margaret, who in the 1850s packed up and left everything they had in Germany. Got on a boat. Nicholas's brother came with him. Nicholas's brother died on a boat. They came to America because of political unrest and religious persecution. Carved a spot out on a hill. Name of that place is St. Marie, my hometown. Margaret and Nicholas was my great-grandpa and great-great-grandpa and great-great-grandma. So here we are 175 years later. We just celebrated our celebration last year, talking about the same thing. That isn't America. And I don't care what people do in their personal lives. I consider Representative Harris a great friend. We work together on a lot of bills. What he does and other people do is their business. But don't make people who feel that this is wrong, don't make our students say that it's okay. Don't make us live by a different set of the rules during the week than what we live by on the weekend. And that's exactly what this bill does. You already have civil unions. You admitted 2 years ago that that's all you wanted. Let's just leave it at that and honor the most basic tenet of our state and federal constitution: religious freedom, not just for priests and pastors and rabbis, but for everyone. Please vote no.
Representative Chapel-Lavia.
Thank you. To the bill. I rise today to speak on the Illinois Religious Freedom and Marriage Fairness Act. As a military officer, a veteran, and as a legislator of the greatest state, I've raised my hand to 2 oaths of office: the oath of the Constitution of Illinois and the Constitution of the United States. And in both times, it was to promise to promote justice for all, not just some people, but justice for all people, regardless of their ethnicity, religious, or sexual persuasion. As a Catholic follower of Jesus with a Pope, Pope Francis, I'm clear our Catholic religious doctrine has at its core love, compassion, and justice for all people. So rising to speak today is both very easy for me and extremely difficult. With that said, I hold in my right hand 2 marriage certificates, representing a myriad of two marriage certificates, and another in my other left hand, a letter signed by 326 plus religious leaders who support marriage fairness. Episcopal, Presbyterian, Catholic, Lutheran, Mennonites, United Evangelical, Mormon, Utilitarian, Methodist, and the United Church of Christ, and many other Christian leaders in my 83rd District of Aurora and North Aurora have come to my office and make it very clear that now, right now, the government is blocking their religious freedom to marry people within their religious doctrine. Now, in my right hand that I held up earlier, I have my own marriage certificate and a marriage license of a former colleague of this esteemed body of representatives, now the city clerk of Chicago, Suzanne Mendoza Sostek. And so you see, there are 2 things that dawned on me when I looked at both of these documents. These pieces of paper were made and printed on ink and paper that were paid for by using taxpayers' money. Yet not all taxpayers have an equal right to purchase these papers from government. And secondly, it dawned on me that my certificate reads religious ceremony, but Susanna's reads a ceremony was done by Supreme Court Justice Ann Burke. And in fact, religious leaders are not the only ones who can officiate a marriage in the state of Illinois. In Illinois, marriage can be officiated by a judge, retired judge, associate judge, circuit magistrate, or even a tribal leader in the Indian Nation, and even Cook County clerk of Cook County. There are 3 states, Florida, Maine, and South Carolina, that allow a notary public to officiate. So clearly, the religious community does not have a monopoly on marriage. Finally, let me say, many religious leaders in the 83rd District understand the challenge of my Catholic faith and content to constitutional public policy. I represent all people. And while I'm sad that an estimated 2/3, that's 2 out of 3 people in Kane County, are unchurched, and while I believe strongly in biblical John 17 unity, it is not the job of a legislator to bring about that unity. That is the work of religious leaders, and that is a hearty task ahead of them. This bill strengthens religious freedom. So for these considerations, I stand today in support of the Illinois Religious Freedom and Marriage Fairness Act. God bless the people of the state of Illinois.
Representative Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My thoughts on this issue have been heavily influenced by my own experience as an African-American woman living in downstate Illinois. Obviously, a generation or two ago, I would not have had the opportunity to serve my community in the General Assembly if it weren't for people's thoughts and ideas about what was acceptable having evolved. And I thank God for that. I thank God that people's ideas about what is acceptable, they evolved beyond what my mother's ideal would be for her unborn daughter when she sat at lunch counters that read whites only. She didn't do that so that her daughter, that she did not have at that time, would one day be able to serve in the Illinois General Assembly. She did it because it was the right thing to do. I'm voting for marriage equality today because it's the right thing to do. I am voting with a strong sense of confidence because I know that enhancing the civil rights of others does not diminish the civil rights of anyone in this room or anyone in this state. The thoughts and opinions of others I respect highly, even though they may not agree with me, but I am simply of the feeling, and I'm convicted today, that separate but equal in Illinois and in this land is un-American, and that is why I will be voting for marriage equality today.
The next great barrier that we're standing in front of today in our generation is the prohibition on marriage for same-sex couples. When things are unequal, we feel it. Inequality is life out of balance. Inequality is an offense to the very foundation of our country. Equality is something we must stand up for, and today we must stand on the right side of history and make Illinois more equal for all of our citizens. We can no longer say to one couple that their love is deserving of marriage and to another couple that their love should only be called a partnership. Separate but equal is never equal. Children of same-sex couples should not grow up wondering why their family is treated differently from other families. Over the years, people have said to those of us who have always supported marriage equality that we're brave. Brave? Brave for being openly supportive of gay marriage and gay adoption. With all due respect, I humbly dissent. We aren't being brave. We are being smart because we know that love is a human experience, not a political statement. I have several friends whose marriages have clearly outlasted mine. They are raising wonderful children together. Many have been together for over 3 decades. Recently, one of those couples, Lee and David Newbecker, were down here in Springfield with their daughter, Braden. I'm sure many of you remember Braden. She took a day off of school and came down here with her dads to stand in solidarity. And she went from office to office, handing a letter that she wrote to many of you, and I'd like to share parts of her letter. It was entitled, "Why My Dads Should Be Married." It began, "Love is important. My two dads should be able to marry and have the same rights as everybody. How would you feel if you couldn't marry someone just because the government said you weren't allowed to? If I loved someone and wasn't allowed to marry them, I'd be pretty upset. My family taught me that even if you don't agree with someone, you should still be kind and respectful. The government should be respectful too. Also, my church tells me that you should treat other people how you want to be treated. My dads are very unique. We do lots of silly things, like drink hot cocoa every time it snows. Every time we go to the same place in Florida with one of my dad's whole family, our family knows how to have fun. We do lots of road trips. One of my favorite things to do with my family is game night. I love this family and every single thing we do as a family. Before I lived with my two dads, my life was horrible. My old family never treated me well. They wouldn't stand up for me. If my foster sister would fight with me, my old mom would just sit there and watch me get hurt. I'd have to fight back even if I didn't want to. Each time I was at a foster home, they promised me they'd treat me and my brother equally. They always broke their promise. I left 5 times until I found my two dads. They promised they would keep me safe and equal. Now I'm 10, and they still keep their promises. They do so much for me. They never hurt me or my brothers. I feel so safe. I believe now that I can do anything with my two dads. Braden closed her letter, asking, "Will you let my dads be married?" She drew 2 little boxes at the bottom, one for a check for yes and one a check for no. For the love of family, I'm checking yes. For Braden, for Michael, and Cody and their dads, join me. Say yes for dignity, yes for respect, and yes for families all over Illinois, and vote aye. Thank you.
Mr. Yingling.
And for nearly a year, I have envisioned this moment, wondering what words I would say or what statement I would give. I've drafted many speeches in my mind and on paper, but I've torn up and disregarded each one. At this monumental moment, what would I say? How could I ever put to words what exists in my heart? And then suddenly I realized, this is not a complicated issue. This is not an issue that needs to be spoken about in numbers or mathematical equations. This is a very simple issue. This issue is simply about family and family values. It's about your family, and it's about my family. Unfortunately, I'm not able to be joined today by my amazing family, my partner Lowell, and our 3 outstanding kids, Maddie, Drew, and Max. Lowell and I feel pain when our kids feel pain. We celebrate our kids' accomplishments and rejoice in their achievements. We strive to make sure that they have every opportunity that your kids have. but we are a family that is treated differently under the eyes of the law. We are a family that does not have the same protections that your family has. This debate is truly about family, and the issue is very clear. There have been many arguments made that this bill does not protect institutions from religious freedom. And to that I say, religious institutions have been granted vast protections under this bill, and no religious institution is mandated by law to adhere to the contents of this bill. I do not promote my faith because my faith with God is deeply personal. I am a Catholic. Let me repeat that. I am a Catholic. I was raised in the Catholic faith, and the key point of that faith is family values. I pray to an amazing God who has stood with me during the lowest valleys of my life and the highest mountaintops. My God stands with me and my family today, as we are all created in his image, and he never turns his back on his children. I know that my God transcends the directives of human interpretation of his will, because God is love, God is commitment, and God is strength. He stands with me and my family at this very moment, and we stand with him. As a result, there is no one in this chamber that can hide behind the argument that religious institutions will somehow be compelled to do something against their beliefs. So this boils down, again, to a very simple prospect. If you believe that all families across this great state deserve the same legal protections enjoyed by your family, then press the green button. If you believe that certain families, such as my family, should be treated inequitably under the law, then you press the red button. My generation, the new generation of leaders, and unlike Representative Duncan, I'm not in my 40s, my generation, the new generation of leaders, is befuddled by all the fuss surrounding this issue. We believe in fairness. We believe in equal opportunity for our families. My generation understands that a healthy and stable society is built upon the strength of a family, regardless of its makeup. We know that the strength of any society is gauged by the security felt by its people. I was sent here by 108,000 people in the 62nd District. They sent me here to do what is just and to do what is right, to protect all the families of not only the 62nd District, but of our state. They did not send me here to do what is politically expedient, but to do what is right. They sent me here not only to represent their interests, but also take into account the interests of all families across the state. LGBT families live in every county of Illinois, not just the city of Chicago. I and my family are proof of that. I know many of you are afraid. I know many of you are concerned about your re-elections. But I share this with you. Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the recognition that there is something far more important than that fear. Do not let yourself succumb to fear of politics, but rather embrace the magnitude of the greatness of all the families in the state. The great people of the 62nd District believe that all families deserve the same legal protection under the law. On behalf of the great people of the 62nd District, my family and I encourage you to join us. On behalf of all the families in the state, stand with us and vote yes.
Representative Cassidy, Mr. Turner in the chair. Representative Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. To the bill. This is no ordinary bill we're debating here. When I first came to Springfield, one of the most common pieces of advice I got was don't take anything personally. And usually that's incredibly sound advice. I can't do that with this bill, as this bill could not be more personal. This bill goes directly to how I am defined, how my family is defined by this state. Whether Kelly and I can care for each other when we're sick, whether our family can be considered real, whether we are as valued as members of this community as any other. That's what we're debating here today. You've met my boys. Josh, Daniel, and Ethan are watching today. They've faced those questions about our family, not just on the playground where you might expect it, but here in this very building, this cathedral of justice. We spend a lot of time here together during session. Inevitably, we end up talking about our families. And as we've shared our stories and talked about parent-teacher conferences and soccer schedules and recitals and the things and the people that we miss when we're not there, these have been very simply shared experiences of our families. And I never got the sense from any of you in those conversations that you thought of our family as somehow less than. Our experiences are the same, except for how we are protected and valued by this state. And we are treated as less than by this state that all of us in this room love enough to serve. Last year, I got the call that we all dread. My partner Kelly was being rushed to the hospital in excruciating pain, and I left here at the crack of dawn in a hurry to get home to her. On the way home, in addition to the thoughts that we all would have under the circumstances, will I get there in time? What's wrong? What her condition might be. I also worried that I wouldn't be allowed in to see her when I got there, and wondered if I should take the extra time to go all the way home and find that durable power of attorney for health care. I was weighing the risks of going straight to her side or spending another hour in transit to get a piece of paper to prove that we were real. The worries about making it to her on time are worries we would all share, but there are only a handful of us in this room that would have that other worry and that other question to weigh about that extra hour of transit. Until our relationships are on an equal footing, there will always be questions to answer under those circumstances. This vote today isn't about the next election or even the one after that. This is about a question you'll face at some point in the future. What did you do when faced with this historic moment? Whether that future is embodied in my boys or your kids, your nieces and nephews, your grandchildren, or that boy at your son's high school who's being bullied because he's just too different for your small town. It is their opinion of your actions today that should determine what you do. Which really brings me to the piece of advice that I got that always applies. You will never regret doing the right thing. Today, the right thing is to tell my family, these families here today and watching us, and those kids wondering if it really does get better, that you are valued, you are equal. Cast your vote for equality, for the right thing. Please vote yes and join us on the right side of history.
Representative Lang.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, before I commence my remarks, I want to point a couple of remarks toward the sponsor of the bill. Greg, you have persevered in the face of pressure, attack, even from people who should have been on your side. People picketing your office who should have been picketing the opposition. People in this chamber who have not been friendly to you have turned a deaf ear when you needed them to at least just listen. And for what you've done over the last years on this issue, not only within your community, but for all of us, making us sit here quietly for a couple hours, which is pretty rare, having a significant debate on an important public policy issue, you will have my undying gratitude for bringing this body together to do this, and I thank you very much. For those of us who were here, virtually all of us, on May 31st, when the galleries were packed, even more than they are today, And there was anticipation in the air from early morning that this bill would be called for a vote. It was such a devastating moment for those of us who support this measure, particularly for the sponsor, that the bill was not called for a vote. The sponsor did the right thing at the time. The bill would not have passed at that time. And he did honor to the cause by doing the right thing at that time. But on that day, we heard from the sponsor of the bill with gut-wrenching emotion about what this meant to him. We heard perhaps the best speech I've ever heard on the House floor that day in my 26 years by Deb Mell, who's with us today. And yet, some of you are not moved. If these stories do not move you, ladies and gentlemen, what does? Some of you who will vote no today want to vote yes and don't have the guts to do it. Why it takes guts to do the right thing when you know in your heart what the right thing is beyond me. I heard distortions from some who are opposed, distortions dealing with all sorts of things, the religious exemptions in the bill, lawsuits, polygamy, teaching homosexuality in the schools. Where do any of you read that in this legislation? I've read it from cover to cover more than once, and my guess is some of the people who spoke in opposition today haven't read a single word of the bill. Sometimes it's instructive to read the bill, ladies and gentlemen. If you did, you wouldn't have said some of the things that I heard on the floor here today. As many have said on this floor today and other days, this bill is simply about love. And as Representative Williams said very early in the debate, we don't talk much about love on the House floor. It's not an issue we talk about, it's not an issue we legislate, but it's an issue we all care about, and it's an issue we all talk about. How we deal with our families, and how we deal with our friends, and how we deal with our colleagues, and how we deal with our business associates. It is inconceivable to me that in a society where over 50% of the marriages end in divorce, leading to orphan children, leading to homelessness, leading to poverty in some cases, and then some of those folks get remarried and redivorced. It is inconceivable to me in a society that is so desperate for love and so desperate for closeness and so desperate for people to live peaceably with one another that anyone can turn their back on this legislation. All this legislation proposes to do is to let people be together in peace and in love and make the world a better place. Some have said, oh, if this bill passes, it will destroy the family unit as we know it. Really? Whose? Whose family unit will be destroyed by allowing two consenting adults who wish to get married to get married? Is it going to affect your life, your family, your children, your neighbors, your community? You know it won't. That's just a bunch of rhetoric you have to say because if you're going to be opposed, you have to say something. It's just rhetoric. It won't destroy anybody's family. What it will do is strengthen the bonds of love and friendship that should make this country what it is. I heard something about religion from a few people. And in my religion, we have a phrase that it is in Hebrew called tikkun olam. Tikkun olam means to repair the world. To repair the world. To go where we find misery and do our best to fix it. To go where there are problems in life and find ways to make them better. I can't imagine a bill we could ever have before us that isn't more about tikkun olam than this one is. And isn't that our mission as elected officials? To repair the world, to make it a better place to live for everyone in it, not just the people who are benefited by the current law, not just the people who live in our own house, not just the people who we like down the street, but everyone in our state and everyone in our country. And to do anything else violates the basic premise of what we're doing here in the first place. Ladies and gentlemen, in the Senate debate on this legislation, they went on for a very long time, as we did, but there was one comment made by one senator that really struck me. One senator talked about his 3 daughters. 2 of them straight, 1 of them gay. And he asked the body why his 2 straight daughters should have different rights under the law in the state of Illinois than his 3rd daughter. What other way can we answer the question? What other question do we need to ask? Why should that senator have 2 daughters that have rights under the laws of the state of Illinois and a 3rd daughter that does not, simply because she's gay? For us to conclude that that senator's 3rd daughter should have less rights than his other 2 is to slap her in the face, is to slap that senator in the face, is to slap everyone in the state of Illinois who feels as that senator does right in the face. We can do better than that. We have a responsibility and a historic opportunity to do the right thing for the people of the state of Illinois, all the people of the state of Illinois. All of you, probably all of you, saw the movie Lincoln. And the character in that movie that Tommy Lee Jones played said over and over and over again that ending slavery was about equality under the law. Not the religious law, not the law of your church, not the law of your next door neighbor, but the law. And the law of the state of Illinois demands that if we're going to have equality for everybody in the state of Illinois, this bill must pass. I beg of you to vote your conscience and to vote aye.
Speaker Madigan, Representative Lang in the chair.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen, I'll be very brief. First, to Greg Harris, thank you for the long, hard work that you put into this bill, and my regrets for the unwarranted criticism that was heaped upon you by certain, quote, supporters of the bill. It was not warranted, it was not needed, it did not help the passage of the bill, probably hurt the passage of the bill. My thoughts regarding this legislation were formulated before the quote that I'm going to offer to all of us. And the quote that I offer is a quote from Pope Francis of the Roman Catholic Church, who is quoted as saying, "If someone is gay and he searches for the Lord and he has goodwill, who am I to judge?" Vatican experts were quick to point out that Pope Francis was not suggesting that the priest or anyone else should act on their homosexual tendencies. But Pope Francis has spoken, and he has articulated the basics of my thinking on this issue. The history of civilization is a history of people finding each other. 2 people find each other. They get to know each other. they come to a judgment that they love each other, they want to be with each other, that each will help the other move through life, and then hopefully each will help the other in the raising of children. That's the simple history of civilization. And people have found each other over all of these centuries. People that are straight and people that are gay. Those that are gay living in these relationships under the law are illegal. And so that brings me to my personal thought. For those that just happen to be gay, living in a very harmonious, productive relationship, but illegal, who am I to judge that they should be illegal? Who is the government to judge that they should be illegal? And for me, that's the reason to support this bill. This is a bill that's long in coming. It ought to be passed today and shortly become the law of Illinois. I plan to vote yes. Thank you.
Mr. Harris to close.
So thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the House, for what I think has been a very heartfelt, a very thorough, and a very informative debate. The one thing we know is that there are strong feelings on both sides of this issue, and we need to be respectful of everyone who has expressed an opinion today, whether they stood in support of the bill or whether they stood against the bill. But at the end of the day, what this bill is about is love, it is about family, it is about commitment. At the end of the day, this bill is about the vision that the founders of our country had and wrote into our Constitution, where they said, America is not a destination, America is a journey. America is a journey. And we'll continue to walk down that road and make America a better place, to make ourselves a more perfect union, to ensure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. And ladies and gentlemen, there's not a lot more I can say to add to what has already been said, but I just brought with me today, and I promised this serviceman that I would say this on the floor. And so I have a flag here that has been flown in combat in Afghanistan as part of Operation Enduring Freedom from a soldier, an Illinois boy, who is stationed in Kandahar province, who is over there today defending our freedom. And he just asks that when he comes home from defending and fighting for freedom, that we have voted to give him the freedom to marry the person he loves. Ladies and gentlemen, please vote yes.
The sponsor moves that Senate Bill 10 pass. The members will be in their chairs. Those in favor of the bill will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Please take the record. On this question, there are 61 voting yes, 54 voting no, 2 voting present, and this bill, having received a constitutional majority, is hereby declared passed.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.